Nice to see the largest gathering of half asleep old white guys is the U.S. Senator Burns. And thank you to Mr. Glickman. The easiest way to make sure to not mispronounce my name is to just not pronounce it at all. So I appreciate that as well. Thank you for the kind introduction. So we're in Maryland. Used to be a colony, now it's a state. We're going to talk about stuff that happened in both eras, both the colonial era and the post-colonial era. But I promise we won't go too far past the 18th century because modern stuff will worry. Is there anybody here who feels like they need a nap? Who is sleepy? I'm sleepy. Who else is sleepy? All right. I know I usually talk at a sort of somnambulant, slow, sluggish rate. I'm just going to pitch it up some and talk about twice as fast as I usually talk. Is that okay? This one's circulating paper of the 18th century. Let's begin in 1733. Maryland had no paper money on its own before 1733. It passed a Paper Money Act in 1732 and had notes printed in London. This is what they look like when you encounter them on the market today. You can see something that is a full copperplate engraving, which is to say it's not typeset, it's not woodcuts, it is fully engraved in a sheet of copper and printed off of a sheet. Has anyone ever seen one of these in circulated condition? You're a liar if you say yes, because they don't exist. Don't look sleepy at me. I have to wake you up. I raise teenagers. So these things were made in London. It's unclear if they ever even got to Maryland. So this is the way you usually encounter them, with an accurate grade from our friends at a third-party grading service. This is what people like to call an uncut sheet of these things. That's what an uncut sheet looks like. These things came on panes of 5 subjects, but 2 panes facing in a direction. So a full sheet would actually include 10 notes that, like the painting in Goodfellas, one dog goes one way, the other dog goes the other way. That's kind of what we're looking like on these copperplate sheets. Every single one you see on the market that looks like this has been cut and trimmed in modern times to make it an easy, ready-made collection. I reject such things. So about 45 minutes from where we stand is the colonial capital at Annapolis. I'm proud to say it was founded in 1696, unlike that newcomer Williamsburg, which was founded much, much later in 1699. Annapolis' current oldest structure is their old treasury building, which is sort of a misnomer because there is no new treasury building. They could just drop the old, but they don't do it. They like old stuff there. So that's what it looks like today. And this is what it looked like in roughly 1786, when it was most recently the United States Capitol. And that distance from the State House is actually pretty accurate. So you can go check out the Maryland State House and the building where all of these notes were signed, including all of these. I collected Maryland paper currency of the colonial era very, very avidly when I lived in Annapolis. I continued collecting a little while after I left Annapolis. And these notes right here are why I stopped collecting, because I knew I would never get one. We all reach a point in a collection where we think we could continue to collect something that will never actually add something to, or we could just give up and move on to something else, which is what I did. So the first, I'll say, collectible note, the first issued note in Maryland that a collector could hope to obtain was issued in 1748. Up there on the upper right, you can see, again, a copper plate sort of printing with manuscript editions. Those were called new bills, replacing a older type bill, which is not known to exist today. That is the only that I know of 1751 note. You can see it is in not great condition, but it's the only game in town. The 1756 notes, everyone that I've ever seen in however many decades I've been doing this, came from Eric Newman's collection. The only place I've ever seen one sell, the only place I've actually held one in my hand outside of a museum. And you can see you've got a typeset and woodcut face. We don't have obverses on paper money, we have faces and backs. And a pretty neat nature print on the back of the 1756 notes, which of course is a technological advancement invented by Benjamin Franklin. So we have some of Benjamin Franklin's influence filtering down to Maryland, even as early as 1756. Now, the sort of collectible series of Maryland colonial paper money begins in 1767. These are the notes you can actually get. 1767 notes are scarce, particularly in nice condition. And most of what I'm going to show you today is more or less finest note stuff. When you collect colonial paper money today, you're fortunate because what you're actually collecting is the residue of all the great collections assembled in the 19th and 20th century, more or less all of which came from two auctions. John Ford's collection is more of a meta collection. It's a collection of collections because John Ford's collection included the FCC Boyd collection, which was built primarily from the Henry Chapman collection and some other collections. So when you look at a Ford catalog and he's got 2 or 3 of something rare, it's because he had 3 or 4 collections in his collection. Eric Newman's collection is actually a pretty similar case. He got to obviously cherry pick the best of the stuff from Colonel Green, a lot of stuff from Virgil Brand, and all the stuff he picked up otherwise. The 1767 notes, as you can see, have woodcuts around the borders, have a tight set central face, and on the back have a nature print. Again, the same thing taken from Benjamin Franklin. And you can see there they are printed by Mr. Jonas Green. And this would be the last issue of Maryland paper money printed by Jonas Green because he died in, memory serves, 1769. Denomination here, 1/3 of a dollar, convenient denomination. And also notice up in the corners of the face, TS sculpts. TS does not stand for tough noogies. It's actually a initials of an engraver. Anybody know who that engraver is?
Thomas Sparrow.
Thomas Sparrow. Right, somebody should give you a prize tonight or something. Man. Something we'll forget about. Yeah, Thomas Sparrow engraved woodcuts for Maryland paper money that was first introduced in 1767. Those Thomas Sparrow engraved woodcuts were used all the way through the Maryland series through 1774. Now, this is Jonas Green's house, where he did his printing. This photograph is probably late 1890s in Annapolis. I lived a couple blocks from here. It's easy to collect stuff. You can walk past the place it was printed on your way to where it was signed. It's kind of a fun way to collect that local fact. And that's what it looks like up there on the left today, or at least 10 years ago when minis were still on the road. And it was an Airbnb for many, many years. It was actually on a market a few years ago, but I was about $2 million short. And when they did archaeology on Jonas Green's house in 1985, they found that this guy was a real pig. And instead of taking stuff to the landfill the way he should have, he dumped all of his used lead type in his backyard. Now, that's a really rude thing if you're trying not to poison the neighbor's well, but it's a great thing if you're trying to leave clues for future archaeologists. And one of the best things they found the engraved lead piece, the engraved type, for the death head that Jonas Green used in the Maryland Gazette during the Stamp Act crisis. They found that actual printing, which is still in the Maryland State Archives. Pretty cool item. And that was probably engraved by Thomas Sparrow, who was more or less the house engraver for the Jonas Green establishment, both paper money and the Maryland Gazette. All right, so 1767 is a distinctive issue for a few reasons. Not only is it the first collectible issue of Maryland paper money, it is the first dollar-denominated currency anywhere in what became the United States. It also is the very first issue to include a coin vignette. And for those of you that like, say, obsolete currency or even federal currency, you know, the great-great-granddaddy of the 1886 $5 silver certificate with its 5 silver dollars across the back and the gold notes is this that has that repeating little woodcut of, ironically enough, a Spanish mainland type 8 real. Not sure why that's it, but that's what he engraved and that's what we have. So 1767 Maryland $1 note is a really cool note to have if you like first and superlatives. First dollar-denominated note, first coin vignette in American history. And you can see, again, the nature cut on the back. And everybody see the upside-down IG on the left side of the back? Another anti-counterfeiting device with Jonas Green's initials there. Now, of course, you can't have the first ever issued coin vignette if you don't have its big brother, the $2 note too. You have to have both, of course. And a neat thing that Jonas Green did with the typesetting on this note, when he indicated that this was an indented bill, in other words, a bill with a fancy cut indent taken out of a stub book that could then be matched up to guarantee that it hadn't been raised, it hadn't been counterfeited. To indicate that it was an indented bill, a bill with an indent at the left margin, he actually made the typescript that called it an indented bill curvy like the indent. Bonus points for creativity, Jonas. Well played. Incidentally, this is a commercial announcement. This isn't the fact that we're talking. This will be sold on Monday. You can go check it out there. Called Gem on Circulating Forward. It's been called 5080 PQ by the It's been worn since 2014. Why are you laughing? They're always right. What's wrong with you people? Don't you know expertise these days? All right, so 1770 was the next issue. I have kind of a soft spot for fractional notes, things like a 1/9 of the dollar, because these are your real workhorse notes. I mean, this is less a piece of paper money and more a paper coin. This is a fractional. This is meant to take the place of a coin that was then scarce in circulation. And just like dimes and pennies today, these things got worn to death. So it's very, very hard to find these in high grade. You can see the TS for Thomas Sparrow persists on this issue. But the 1770 notes are special because after the death of Jonas Green, the colony of Maryland turned to the person that knew his business the best, that knew how to operate his printing press the best, that the colony and the business interests behind the Maryland Gazette trusted the most to do their printing. And that was Jonas Green's widow, Anne Catherine Green, born Anne Catherine Cook. She was Dutch by birth. And when Jonas Green was Ben Franklin's intern, she was working in Ben Franklin's house as a domestic. So they met, a love match, a romantic connection in Ben Franklin's house. But while Jonas Green was a really great printer, Anne Catherine Green was the equal of that for having 14 children. Advantage, Anne Catherine Green. Now, most of the notes of the 1770 series that she printed say printed by A.C. Green. So if you're an LA Lakers fan, you would have kept one of those up. But for me, I think that important women in history are worth recognizing. So that's why I like the 1/9 note, because that's the one where she actually used her full name. And I want you to think for a moment about the guts it took as Anne Catherine Green, the only woman who was an official colonial printer in this era in any colonial times, to actually put her full name on there. So that speaks to her courage and her guts, and also the reputation that she had in the community. Now, she, just to hedge her bet a little bit, put her son's name on there too, but I'm guessing since he died at 23 later in 1770, he was probably just a troublemaking knucklehead, and she felt like he back. Okay. That's what she looked like. So that's 1769. In that picture, she's more or less the same age as I am now. That's what 14 is. She looks. Anybody see what she has in her hand, though? This is painted by Charles Wilson Peale, also of Annapolis. And she holds a copy of the Maryland Gazette. She holds a copy of her production, what she made, what she printed. And that's in the National Portrait Gallery in DC now. One of my all-time favorite early American portraits. All right, so 1770, another 1/9 note. Again, you see Anne Catherine's name there on the back, and I include this just to show what it looks like at the bottom of a sheet with the deckling still intact there to show the edge of the paper. 1774 $1 note also has the coin vignette like the 1767 and 1770 issues. And you can see here it's printed by A.C. and F. Green. That was Frederick Green. There are no notes in the 1774 issue that actually spell out Anne Catherine's name entirely. Interestingly enough, though, Edison Clapham signed both of these 1774 notes. They were basically clerks in the employ of the government of Maryland, then still controlled by the Calvert family. William Edison wrote a book about his experiences in Annapolis as basically an English-born functionary in the government called Letters from America. It's a bunch of letters that were back to England. And it's neat. All of the letters in this book are written to his wife, except for the ones where he talks about how good-looking the women are in Annapolis. Somebody else. $2 note, again, with the $2 coin vignette there. This was an Eric Newman's collection. You might wonder why he had a, beat up circulated note with some mounting marks in the back and whatnot. And that's because this is the only one I've ever seen out of hundreds of these things that actually was cut to retain the stub that should have been in the stub book that was kept in the Treasury building so that they can match them up later and make sure that denominations weren't raised and things were counterfeited and whatnot. So that has a really neat little souvenir or relic of how it was issued, in this case, miscut. That's probably, you see that in a board school, that's probably a $125 note. It's unique. But keep your eyes open. Paper money's worth looking at. Flip through it when you see it. A $6 note, more or less the same design, against typeset face, woodcuts around the edge, Thomas Sparrow signs, nature print on the back. And this is what these things look like in not sheet form. This would have been an incomplete sheet or half sheets. And these are the only large fragments of the 1774 issue that I know of. Ah, this is the good one. So the gunpowder notes were issued in July 1775. These are the first notes issued by the Patriots, issued by the rebel government, or what they call the Provincial Convention of Maryland in 1775. And since you all look so awake, I talk about this thing all night. But I'll forward it. So if I step away from the mic, can people still hear me?
Yeah.
And I'm going to make you work.
Okay.
I'm going to gesticulate wildly and move around a lot.
Oh, perfect.
Keep her over it. All right, so you've got this awesome woodcut illustration up here by Thomas Barrow. Barrow did sign these things. There's a TS here in the border somewhere. Up here, the gentleman holding a torch, that's King George III. He's threatening to set fire to Annapolis while trampling a little lozenge there that is engraved M. Carta. So King George III is trampling the Magna Carta, in other words, trampling the rights of Americans as freeborn Englishmen, while, again, trying to set fire to the city of Annapolis. And he's holding hands with Britannia. You recognize her. She just stood up from the back of the halfpenny, piece of pie. And she is being handed a piece of paper over here that says CONG period, PETI period. Con Petty, the congressional petition, better known to you if you remember your AP US history, as the Olive Branch petition in 1775. So that's when the Americans were basically like, look, y'all are really screwing up over there in London. We really hate what you're doing, but you know, if you make some changes here, we might still stick around. That didn't go so hot. So Britannia is being handed the Olive Branch petition. Over here, you recognize this woman holding that funny little cap on a pole. So that's Liberty. Her little cap up there says LIB, or Liberty Cap. And she's trampling a lozenge here, ironically enough, that says slavery. So Liberty is trampling slavery. Liberty is handing the Olive Branch petition to Britannia, who was holding hands with King George III while he tramples on our rights and set fire to our cities. Very subtle. In swarm. And meanwhile, behind Liberty, trampling on slavery, is the entire rank and file of the Continental Army flying flags behind it. Again, it's a very subtle message. We're not sure if it got through or not. Oh, there's TS for Thomas Barrow. So these things are printed miserably. Let's put it bluntly. They're not printing well. So you oftentimes can't see all of the little, you know, the Con Petty and the slavery and the M Carta here. So when you're looking for a gunpowder note, these were called gunpowder notes because they were sold to raise or issued to raise money for gunpowder because of the guy with the torch. As you look for these things, is it better to have one in a very high-graded holder or one that's actually printed so that you can see the design you're paying a whole bunch of money for? I know my choice. So, happy night. I don't even know who those guys are. So when you're looking at these things, you're not just looking for technical grade, like you're looking at a lion dollar, you're rather a well-struck one than a softly struck one. It's the same as paper money. You're looking for something with a nice strike and complete design trade. The back is less interesting. You've got commerce and war kind of having an agreement with peace in the middle. Peace triumphs over everything. You've got a whole line of Americans. You got a ship. Again, one dog goes one way, the other dog goes the other way. So these things are great. $16, weird denomination. Yes, no? Oh, big old gold coin. That'd be perfect sense to everybody there. Incidentally, it's sort of fun that liberty is trampling slavery when James Bryce, who's signed there at the left, is the guy who purchased a young boy for Lafayette 2 days after he got in America. Oh. Look, we don't always say what we're doing, we say, you know? Dr. Rutger.
Were they at the made by the engraver, or were they engraved based on the legislative recommendation? In other words, who each decided who was going to the vignette?
So there's no documents to answer that question one way or the other. So all we can do is speculate. I don't know if the provincial convention would have had to, you know, look at blue lines, you know, look at page proofs, sign off on this. I would assume not. The political stance of the Green family was very well known at that point. And I think at that point, entrusting the printing of these notes to the Green family they kind of knew what they were going to get. Now, one way through history we can tell whether something is approved or not approved is how long it persists, right? So, for instance, you know, if a TV show stays in syndication for 30 years, people probably like it. If an issue of paper money is made with a design once and only printed in real small numbers and never printed again that looked anything like that, my guess is people didn't think too warmly about it. That would be my interpretation. But we don't have any documentary evidence one way or the other. That's a good question. Thank you for that. $8. Another totally sensical denomination in this era. That's your half Joe.
Oh,
This is the note that's in the Maryland or in the Monday auction, the Stack Bowers auction on Monday. This was Ford's note. You can see M. Carta and slavery and LIV for liberty a little bit better there, and Kong Petty. This particular note is interesting. The serial number 1969 note. This was from Ford, and what was unknown at the time of Ford, this note was plated both face and back in John W. Hazeltine's 1872 work on colonial and continental paper, which was the first photographically illustrated American numismatic work on paper money. And the only note in that whole book that showed face and back was this note. So this is actually the very first ever photographically illustrated American piece of currency. Kind of a cool thing. That's what the whole thing looks like. Great looking note. This was Eric's $8. Now, as we all know, Eric lived to be 106 years old. This was the best one he found. This is about as good as they get. These are not they're known in high grade. This is what they usually look like. So manage your expectations here. You know, sometimes I get want lists from people that say, you know, I want to collect 1794 large cents in a five variety. I only collect 67 red, brown, or higher. And you hand it back and say, might I recommend Franklin Hance, sir? When you're collecting Maryland colonial currency, you have to know that if you want the gunpowder note, this is probably what you're going to end up with, is something that looks like this. So this sort of answers Jim's question as to how much they loved the design. They got a little bit more conservative after that. So this is the December 1775 note. So issued the same year by the provincial convention. So again, we've got a Patriot issued note. But the signs aren't beautiful. There are woodcuts around the edge. Typeset in the middle of the face. You can see that the left signature on the face of this note, F. Green. This was actually signed by the guy that printed it. That's Frederick Green, who was by that point the official printer of the colony of Maryland, because his mother and Catherine Green had passed away by then. $2, again, F. Green. You could be a real nerd and collect these things by signature denominations, but that's how you end up like me with 132 very low grade notes. I don't recommend it. But you could. Now, again, if you're collecting these things, you probably want one that's well printed, well inked. This is a particularly well inked one. So you can see the really cool arm here behind a shield holding a olive branch. That's subtle again. Yeah, it's screw with us, but we still got olive branches back here. Printed by Frederick Green and signed by Gassaway and Hutch. On the 1776 notes, August 1776, they basically look the same as the December 1775 issue. On these lowest denomination issues, just to save clerical time, they only required one signature as opposed to two signatures. And this is extraordinary condition 26. Again, very high grade for one of these things. $4. Again, a sensical denomination in the era. Now, this is where stuff starts getting rare again. You know, we said before 1767, you're probably never going to get these notes, so don't bother. These aren't quite that rare, but they're close. And the reason what we call black money, the issues of 1780 are so rare, they were payable in specie. At this point in the Revolutionary War, when paper money was pretty much good for, you know, lining your boots in the wintertime and not much else, the only way that the Maryland legislature would approve further issues of paper money is if it was actually backed in species, that it would hold its value rather than devaluing to, you know, 180 to 1 or something like that, like the Continentals had in this era. But what that meant is after you got this note in your hot little hand in 1780 or 1781, you had a choice. You could trade this note for $4 silver, or you could keep it and hope somebody collects it someday. Most people cashed it in. They don't really care about it. Now, another neat thing about these 1780 notes, oh, incidentally, the signature there on the left ranks with Boaz Manlove of Delaware as one of my favorite signatures. That's Isaac McCard. That might be my next fantasy football team name, actually. But these were issued and could be received or exchanged for not only specie, but also bills of exchange, which was, we'll get into bills of exchange later. Stay away, we'll talk about it. That is the only multiple of black money left. So that you can see even when they come off the sheet in modern times, they're still vetoed. Guarantee notes, these are essentially continental notes. They were issued for many of the colonies, guaranteed by the Continental Congress, but issued state of Maryland, state of New York, state of Virginia, etc. The only counterfeit of one of these I've ever seen from Eric Newman's collection. The other black money issue was from June 1780. The fractional notes were issued in October 1780, and they are extraordinarily rare. I'm talking 1, 2, maximum of 3 known per denomination. Great, great, great rarities. You can see they're dollar denominated. So this is a 1780 Maryland dime, 1/10 of a dollar. Very cool note. This is Eric's. But I like this one even better. And when I decided to sell my Maryland paper money collection, this is the only one I kept. Why? Because just like the 1767 notes were the first to show a coin vignette, this one also has a coin, not vignette, typeface or a typeset imitation of a coin. They consciously did this. 1/5 of a dollar was equal to a Spanish pistol, right? Spanish 2 real struck in colonial mints was 4 to a dollar. Those struck in the mainland Spain mints were 5 to a dollar because of lower fineness and lower value of silver. And to represent that this was equal to 1 pistorine, which was the most common diminutive silver coin in the Chesapeake region in Maryland and Virginia. Not accidental. So just like Virginia has a pistorine note, a 15 pence note that says 15 pence for 1 pistorine, this is the Maryland pistorine with those cool little circles with crosses in it. And that would evoke for anyone in Maryland of this era that was worth 1 pistorine. I've seen 2 of these, and I think that's all there are, at least in practice. One from Newman, one from May 1781, the red money issue. They call the other black money issue because they were black. They called this the red money issue because it was printed by Mr. Isaac Red. No, that's not true. It's just red printing. Wonderful red border cuts on the face, and the backs are kind of neat. Usually when you see 2 colors on a note of this era, it's an overprint. In other words, it goes through the printing press once, it goes through the printing press again, right? And I think the way these were done were individual, almost ink stamps, because you rarely see them out of register enough to indicate that they went through a printing press once, but you'll see them. This one, you see the State Arms of Maryland just sort of facing up on that one relative to its borders. And sometimes they're flipped the other direction. So I think those central prints on the back were probably actually more or less hand done. So lots of neat denominations here. 1 shilling, again, a diminutive coin-like denomination. And here it entitles the bearer to receive in specie, estimating milled dollars at 7 shillings and 6 pence, which was the Pennsylvania standard rate, rather than the 4 shillings 6 pence of sterling rate that earlier Maryland issues were issued in. So someone could have exchanged this for 1 silver shilling in 1781, and based upon how rare they are, that's what pretty much everybody did. Very, very few of these around today. So 1 shilling, 6 pence, 2 shillings 6 pence. I don't know why it's doing all that crazy white stuff, but yeah, I'll get the idea. 7 shillings 6 pence. That makes this, I don't know why that looks like that. That's really weird. That makes this a $1 note. 7 shillings 6 pence red money. 30 shillings and 3 pounds. And there you go with the upside down centerpiece. Very rare, very cool, very bright, nifty things. But this is sort of the granddaddy of the red money issues. In August of 1781, they did the final emission of official currency from the colony of Maryland. And that was for fractional issues of red money, so coin-like denominations. And these look like tickets, which is why it says, I promise to pay the bearer thereof, hereof, on demand in exchange for this ticket, the sum of 4 pence in the bills of credit emitted under the act of last May session. So in other words, this tiny red money you can trade for bigger red money. They didn't print many of these, and I believe this note's current. Only one I've ever seen or heard of. So this is kind of what you usually encounter with Maryland currency. The stuff is beat up, it's folded, it's weak in design, it's usually sold in fruit plots, but it's not of high enough value to make auction companies give it any individual respect. Stuff like this. But it's valuable to see what these things look like in circulated grade because they circulate. There just aren't that many uncirculated notes around. They didn't survive into modern times in large sheet quantities. The first time I did a colonial currency deal, or was not a deal, was 1991. And that deal included many sheets. For those of you that weren't interested in colonial paper money then or before then, sheets used to be pretty common. And colonial currency sheets are, at this point, literally the only early American numismatic objects that are getting rarer rather than more. And that's because some paper money dealers have really cool, expensive bandsaws on their desks. I wish I was. So this is what we're left with. When you see a really, really high grade Maryland note of this era, it's generally cut from a sheet in modern times, but those sheets were few in number. So generally, if you like these notes, this is kind of the typical condition that you get to collect it. You see things that are kind of landscape printed, get folded in half, they get splits along their vertical center fold, you get corners missing and whatnot. So in this era, to keep their money together, folks came up with solutions. When there was a split along the center or a weakness along the center fold, they could attach another piece of paper on there to make sure it didn't fall apart completely. You could back it entirely, either with a blank sheet of paper, or in this case, I hate that this kind of buzzed out here on the image, because that is a piece from a book of verse called The Conscious Lover. I'll leave that there. John, okay, I'll leave it there. This is backed with a page from a newspaper. I don't know why it's doing this to my images, but there we go. That's all right. A Pennsylvania newspaper, which tells you something about the circulation patterns of early Maryland paper money. Backed notes, as cheap as they are, tell you a lot more than no. You can learn much, much more from a note that's had backing to it. You can tell where it went. You can tell how long it circulated in some cases. If you see something that's got backing on it from 1788 or 89, you know it was probably still kicking around then. Whereas an uncirculated note tells you almost nothing. And then there's pin notes. You want to collect early American women's handicrafts and paper money, you can buy the notes printed by Anne Catherine Grain, or you can collect any note with a pin in it. These are fascinating. Or, in the words of the grading services, they are damaged and they are trash and you can throw them out. There's no accounting it takes.
How do they describe pin notes?
I don't know. Probably split, damaged, stains. Good details, very good details.
So collectively, you think they would have
the primary place where they describe them is on their balance sheet. If someone was stupid enough to give them $20 to go in the hole. So let's talk about checks next. This is a check signed by Tupac Shakur. He did not have to look in there. These images. This stinks.
You just put up a Tupac check?
I did. Why? Like, I think you're still awake, Roger. Look, Tupac like colonial paper money.
Tupac.
I saw them in that. So these are Baltimore checks, but the images are screwed, so we'll keep going. So this is a check from the Bank of the United States, the cashier of the discount and deposit at Baltimore. And you can see that this note is written for 10,000 Spanish dollars. So a bag of silver dollars at $1,000, right? 1,000 silver dollars in the U.S. issued bag. So imagine 10 bags of pillar dollars. They're expensive to ship. This is why checks. And the neat thing about a check like this is that you can see that it was signed multiple times. This essentially served as a piece of circulating paper money, which also explains something about why it's in the condition it's in. Bills of exchange. One of my favorite topics. I could keep you here all night. I might keep you here all night. So this is a Maryland bill of exchange from 1745. At 30 days of sight, 30 days sight of this, my fourth exchange, first, second, and third paid, pay unto Tupac Shakur or order the sum of £9.16 sterling money of Great Britain, value received of him and placed the same to the account of his humble servant Christopher Cole. So what a bill of exchange was, it was the primary way that we sent money internationally or long distance in the 18th century. What it essentially says is, I owe you a sum of money, but if you want to collect it, you got to get it from my buddy who's a merchant in London. Now, if you were paying your neighbor in Maryland that, the way you get your money from a merchant in London was one of two options. You either go to London and collect it in full, or you could sell it to a captain who was going to London, or trade it to a captain who was back for London, or one of the goods that they brought back in the most recent voyage, this sort of thing. So the discounting of bills of exchange, in other words, a bill of exchange that was payable down the street, you could probably get 99% for, right? It didn't take that much effort to walk down the street. If this thing was payable in Timbuktu, maybe you could only get 50 or 60% for it. And that became a securities market. So these bills of exchange were currency of a sort. You can see that they can be signed over by several people and sort of go through hands, but they also ended up serving as something of a bearer bond to an extent, not interest paying, but one of the beginnings of the securities market in this world, or in this country. This is a very fancy bill of exchange. This is the earliest bill of exchange I've ever seen issued in Baltimore. Baltimore is sort of the ultimate Revolutionary War of boomtown. Not much in Baltimore before the Revolution. There are only two buildings still extant in Baltimore that are older than this bill of exchange that were built before 1771. Both of them are down in Fells Point, so about a mile and a half from where we are right now. But after the Revolution, as Annapolis became of diminished interest, Annapolis was full of loyalists, and most of them left, so Annapolis was kind of a ghost town. And American industry, which was then going around the world with great big ships doing lots of trading, needed deep water ports. Annapolis is a very pretty port, but not a very deep port. But Baltimore has this piece of water we call the Inner Harbor. So Baltimore became an enormous boom town as international trade expanded. Baltimore got very, very wealthy and grew very heavily. But at this point in 1771, it was, excuse the pun, a backwater. And you can see there that they weren't even using the town name Baltimore at that point. It was still Baltimore town.
Which was incorporated as a city yet.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, we have town.
Yep, that's exactly right. And you can see that this thing just went down the line of people who took it in trade against debt. And eventually somebody would have had that, gotten that to London and gotten it paid off. Maryland 1772 bill of exchange. Signed by a signer of the Declaration of Independence, Daniel and St. Thomas Jennifer. All right, we'll skip that one. You can't really see it. This is a great one. So you've got a copper plate printed form here. So part printed, part manuscript. And this form, this bill of exchange, was issued by the Principio Company, or Principio Furnace, which is up in Cecil County near Havre and Grace, kind of up on the Pennsylvania state line. One of the investors in the Principio Company was a fellow named George Washington. So this was a major, essentially corporation. This was a multi-state corporation. In the 1760s and 1770s, they made iron. They primarily made cakes for export. And there was a small group of these Principio Furnace bills of exchange that came to market a few decades ago. So this is 1773. And again, you can see how many people signed the back, including Daniel of St. Thomas Jennifer, again, making this a circulating piece of paper money, despite the fact that it was payable in money. This is a super cool bill of exchange issued in Frederick. It's a cool town now. When I lived around here, we call it Fredneck. It's gotten a little cooler in recent years. Now, the major thing happening in Frederick in 1781 was a very substantial POW camp. And the prisoners who were captured in Saratoga were marched from Saratoga, New York to Charlottesville, Virginia, which is now memorialized in Charlottesville by the name of the Barracks Road Shopping Center. God bless America. And after the Barracks Road Shopping Center POW camp or barracks shut down, they marched a lot of these guys up to Frederick. One of the guys who was there was this Brigadier General James Inglis Hamilton. And this guy was the commander of the 22nd Foot, so commanded a unit that was at Saratoga, but apparently charmed his guards so much that they let him run his business from inside of a POW camp. So this was the bill of exchange that was issued, and you can see endorsed by him in the back. And someone later on has said down here, General Hamilton, one of the British prisoners captured at Yorktown, that was York, Pennsylvania, sent to Frederick. Issued in Annapolis, July 1783, signed by the father of the U.S. Navy, James Nicholson. You can see this is payable at the office of the Honorable Robert Morris, Superintendent of Finance. 1786, Baltimore, signed by Tench Tillman, who was George Washington's aide de camp. And it's drawn on John Rucker in London, principal of Constable Rucker and Company. All right, let's see how good y'all are. What does Constable Rucker and Company have to do with colonial coins? Ah, I knew someone would know. They were the ones responsible for producing the no cost language. And here was Tench Tillman drawing on an account with them. So they owed him money. So he was drawing on his account with John Rucker in London for 150 pounds sterling in 1786. 3 identical forms issued at 3 different times somewhere in Maryland. You could basically walk down to your local stationer, to your local print shop, and buy these forms for your use. All right, this is the one thing I snuck in from after the 18th century, just because it's cool. Hey, I know I owe you money. I owe you like 1,111 Spanish bill dollars, and I really want to pay you. I'm sorry that we're at the Cape of Good Hope right now, but you can get it from my friend in Baltimore. And the classic bills of exchange, the one you're most apt to see, are the so-called Hopkinson bills. And these were issued by the federal government, and these were basically issued to pay the interest on loans, on money that was loaned to the federal government. So if you had purchased U.S. bonds, if you had loaned money to the Continental Congress or the federal government during the Revolution, and you were owed interest, they would pay you your interest with these bills of exchange, which, while issued at the Commissioner of Loans in each of the individual states, were payable by the American commissioners in Paris. So what happened was these things would end up getting bought up by people who had business with the American commissioners in Paris. They were essentially, tell me where this starts sounding familiar, federally backed securities that were then discounted and bundled for sale to large investor syndicates. Le plus ça change, as they say. And the thing about this particular joined pair, so this is a 3rd and 4th bill. Bills of exchange were issued typically in triplicate or quadruplicate, and then all 4 bills would get sent to London or Paris wherever they were payable on different ships, and whichever one got there first got paid, and the others kind of became souvenirs for knuckleheaded old white guys in 2026. So that's why we had bills of exchange that still exist today. These are essentially typically the unpaid ones, but they would come on these 4 subject sheets typically. Now, the neat thing about these is these were issued to a guy named Gerard Alexander, who was the son of the guy who founded Alexandria, Virginia. That day. Another one, 1780, to Ignatius Fenwick. Anybody ever been to Fenwick Island? Little beach community named for Ignatius Fenwick. Man, sorry about the images. This is what happens when you use a Mac. And this is the view of Baltimore from on top of Federal Hill. I recommend you go check it out tomorrow while it's sunny. Skip the coin shifter board. Go get outside. Go touch grass or something, okay? But this is one of the earliest city views of Baltimore, when it was that ultimate post-revolutionary town. So enjoy your time in Baltimore. Thanks for listening. Thanks for staying awake. I will entertain questions and thoughts. Sure.
True. Many of the colonies, when they had the denomination in dollars, would have Spanish mill dollars. Do you have a reason why they didn't use that in Maryland?
It was the same thing. I mean, everybody understood that when you said dollar, that's what you meant.
And then in 1781, when they started producing bills with pence, shillings and pounds, that seems like a huge deviation, especially at a time
it's true
where they're trying to get away from British rule.
It's very true.
Why? Any idea why they did that?
No. Is the honest answer? No, I don't know. I mean, I think in the case of many colonies, the choice of dollar denomination was the political calculation. That they were really trying to divorce themselves from pounds and pence and making a political statement by choosing dollars instead. They were trying to have an American-based currency rather than a European-based currency. Now, why they went back to that in 1781, I could only guess that, I mean, there was certainly, at that point, they weren't loyalists, but there were certainly more conservative political powers in control of Maryland at the end of the Revolution. That is for sure. But I can't speak to why they would have changed back to that, although it is important to note that when they say 1 shilling or 7 shillings 6 pence, they meant that in Maryland money of accounts. So like 7 shillings 6 pence was not a sterling denomination. It didn't mean 7 English shillings and a 6 pence. It meant 7 shillings 6 pence. And it's interesting that they would choose that denomination because everyone would have known that 7 shillings 6 pence is a silver dollar. So they were doing the same thing, but with a subtle twist, and I'm not exactly sure why.
Yeah, very odd.
Yeah, it is unusual for sure. What else? Yes.
Well, I just wanted to point out that the yen dollar.
Yeah.
That was creative, but that was really hard to do.
Super hard to do. Yeah,
They had to cut the whole thing.
you got it.
And change the last step.
Yeah.
It did not see anything else like it. Anything we could.
That's right.
That done with movable pipe or with that, or wood cut, those were.
No, I think it was moved. That's a good question. I'm pretty sure it was movable type, but I think what it probably was were pieces of movable type that were fused together into a single piece to represent that curvature, because otherwise the project you're describing is really difficult. Eric, do you agree with that? There's probably a fused piece of some type. You know, it's lead. You can fuse it together just about with the heat through your fingers almost. So I think that's probably it. Any other questions? All right, nap time. Thanks, John.
I'll stop here to thank him. It says it's some guy, John Kraljevich. I think that's this guy. So want to thank him very much for that great talk.
Thank you.
And our great appreciate it.
Thank you. And he spelled my name right. This is awesome.
No problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.